All right, welcome into another You Don't Know Jack. I'm Jackson James. Thank you for joining me again on another episode. It's been a minute. We're back. I want to keep trying to get these up at least once every 2 to 3 days. I'm going to try. Really happy to do this again. So let's get this going. Let me know in the comments how it feels to be watching again. I appreciate any form of interaction. It's awesome to see you guys interact and start posting more clips and whatnot, trying to get this thing up and running and try and build some sort of an audience. But again, thank you. It's been a couple weeks. I think the last time I did a podcast, I talked about training camp, and we're in like week 14, 15 in the NFL. And there's a lot that's happened and a lot that I've missed and whatnot. But let's go through today's rundown on what is happening in today's episode. We're going to talk about that Tampa Bay Atlanta Falcons game last night and kind of what that means for the playoff picture. Then we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the playoff picture. And then we're talking a little bit Cowboys-Eagles in terms of could we see an all-time collapse, or is it just kind of fool's gold to pay any attention to that? We're going to talk about that in today's episode. But like I said, we are going to be talking about the Tampa Bay Atlanta game last night. And it kind of revolves around this NFL coaching hot seat. That seems to be a little bit of a tagline for media people, shows to talk about, is this coach on the hot seat? And I do think it's a real thing that coaches can be on the hot seat, right? And if I was an owner, this is my thing. I would have the shortest leash. I think you get a max of 3 years. In the NFL, 2 to 3 years, right? Especially if you understand your circumstances. And Todd Bowles and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have been in a prime position to compete, really since they've got Baker Mayfield. Now, you could say Todd Bowles taking up a kind of I want to say an older, but an experienced Super Bowl championship team from Bruce Arians. Tom Brady left. He kind of picked, once Bruce retired, he had Tom Brady for a year or two. And then he gets Baker Mayfield in free agency. And he definitely plays a way above expectations. He gets this team into the playoffs and wins a playoff game, right? Maybe there's some noise they can make. Baker Mayfield looks like the number one pick that he was. Everything's looking good in Tampa Bay. Last year, they dealt with some injuries at the wide receiver position, but they were still, made it into the playoffs, won a playoff game, I believe. They may have not. However, still felt really good about not only the team, but the franchise as a whole. And then you go into this year. You're still favored to win the division by a pretty big margin. And you start off the year with a couple of close wins. And it's through like the first 5 weeks where you're thinking, well, this team's pretty good. They're winning close games, which playoff teams do, right? And we complain all the time about the Chiefs and their record in one-time scores or in one-score games. And we're like, oh, those teams are frauds. Well, those teams end up being playoff teams because they're able to pull away those narrow victories. However, that eventually caught up to Tampa Bay this year, and now they're sitting with the record, I believe, in 7-7, and the Carolina Panthers have exceeded expectations, which happens, I want to say, every year with a team. There's always a team that exceeds expectations and potentially could win their division. And that's what we're seeing potentially this year with the NFC South. It's been one of the more lackluster divisions for the last couple of years. Tampa Bay's really owned this division. I think they've won 4 or 5 straight division titles. But now that's in jeopardy after last night, in which they drop a home game against the Atlanta Falcons and also interdivision matchup 29-28. Falcons win on a last-second field goal. And watching that game last night, I felt as if Tampa Bay is good, not great. And those was one of those classic games in which you could see the team make the comeback, right? Atlanta was down, 2 scores, and for some reason they decided, I know analytics tells you to go for 2 when you're down 14 with like 9 minutes left in the fourth, because if you're going to make the comeback, you might as well try to get the win. But I disagree. However, they go for 2 on the first when they're down 7. Sorry, they were down 8 at the time. They could have kicked the extra point, made it a 7-point game. They decided to go for 2, don't get it. Now they're down 8, and then they get an interception. Great play. They go down the field. They score a touchdown, have to go for 2 again, and they don't get it. And so now they're down 2, and they have to get another stop. Well, they get that stop, and they kick the game-winning field goal. It wasn't like oh my gosh, what an insane comeback, but it was one of those games where you're like, Atlanta's still in this. And they were committing penalties all over the place. Tampa Bay should have really blown out the Falcons. Give credit to Kirk Cousins, Kyle Pitts. That guy is forever on my hate list because so much for making the playoffs. I stumbled in with a 7-7 record, and I get met with a 40 bomb by Kyle Pitts of all players. Going beside that, though, taking a deeper look at Tampa Bay, I think it's not an obvious take, but they have a head coaching problem in Tampa Bay. Todd Bowles, he's more of a defensive guy, and you look at the offensive stats for Baker Mayfield this year compared to last year. Now, again, we're only a couple weeks into the season, 17 games played versus 14 games played for Baker Mayfield. Last season, 4,500 yards passing. This year, 1 yard short of 3,000. 22 touchdowns this year to 41 last year. 16 interceptions to 7. That number is actually a lot lower than I thought it would be. So he's doing a better job of protecting the ball. And his QBR is around the same. And so you're like, okay, what is going on with this offense? And I don't think it's an offensive issue. I just think it's kind of like a team issue, which is, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But if we look at their log this year and really their schedule, they've dropped some games in which they really should have won. Let's start from the beginning of the season. They get the win against Atlanta 23-20, 1-score game. Beat Houston 20-19, 1-score game. Beat New York 29-27. I believe that was on the fluky kick 6, the game the Jets had where they almost snuck out a victory. Wouldn't have been a 1-score game, but it ended up being a 1-score game. Then they lose to Philly by 6, 31-25. Beat Seattle and San Francisco in back-to-back games, and those are quality wins. You look back at those games, you're like, these are quality games, right? Then they get smacked by Detroit and 24-9, and maybe that's showing a little bit of the sprinkles of what's to come for the Tampa Bay Bucs. They beat New Orleans 23-3, and then they go on to lose the next 5 out of 6 games. Lost to New England, Buffalo, Los Angeles. They beat the Cardinals, they lose to the Saints, and lose to the Falcons. And so now their season comes down to the final 3 games because they're not going to make the wild card. And 2 of those games go against your division rival, Carolina Panthers. And even one of those games could be critical and really determine your season if you're Tampa Bay. Because next week they're going to go on the road to Carolina. Carolina is playing really with house money. They were probably celebrating, holy crap, Tampa Bay is really fading. And this is the collapse that, no one's really talking about just because it's kind of the NFC South. But Tampa Bay is absolutely collapsing right now in front of our eyes. This is what people think the Eagles are going to do. No, this is what Tampa Bay is doing right now. And it is actually quite insane of how big of a collapse this is. Obviously, they missed Bucky Irving with some time there. That he is in a very important part of their offense, especially in that run game. Mike Evans was out. He showed up last night in big moments, made some great catches. And so this team has talent. And so at the end of the day, it's a head coaching problem into why they've regressed to really an average team, or at least a good team that just can't win, because that happens all the time. So let me pull up real quick the head coaches for the NFL, because this brings up a talk about the NFL and the hot seat, right? It started a discussion. This will round out the conversation of this and which coaches I believe will be fired at the end of the season, or at least coaches I would fire if I was the GM/owner, right? Now, I don't know what the order is. Maybe I think it's alphabetical by team name, but starting with Jonathan Gannon, I would probably fire him because, you have the quarterback. I believe in Kyler Murray. I really do. Maybe To me, Kyler Murray passes the eye test, in which, yes, I know the Cardinals haven't really been competitive last couple of years. Their defense actually picked it up this year, and Jonathan Gannon, I believe, he's a defensive guy that came over from Philly. And so, right, my thing is, if you move off Kyler Murray, you're going to, you trust Jonathan Gannon with a rookie quarterback or wherever they go with the quarterback. I don't love that. Yeah, he has 2 years of experience. However, I would probably relinquish him, but I could totally see a scenario where they keep him for one more year, see what he can do with a new quarterback can stay healthy. We see with Jacoby Brissett fits that offense a little bit better for some reason, even with Marvin Harrison out, which is just insane. Arizona has been competitive, in most games this season, but they're kind of a team you look at the schedule and be like, all right, that's a win. And for the Cardinals, I would give him the boot. Going to the next team, Raheem Morris for the Atlanta Falcons. This is a guy I would fire because Atlanta, to me, I think I predicted them to win the division this year or at least be competitive in that wild card. They're non-existent. They don't own their first-round pick next year, right? That's a GM issue, not a head coach issue. However, Atlanta was supposed to go all in this year. In my opinion, there's not a major drop-off from Michael Penix to Kirk Cousins. So the quarterback injury isn't a valid excuse in my opinion, especially with Raheem Morris being more of a defensive guy. It shouldn't be that much of a drop-off going from Michael Penix to Kirk Cousins, at least as Michael Penix is still a younger player. I like him as a quarterback, but not that much more than Kirk Cousins, especially you've seen these last night and how he performed. Now, look, they got a big road win, and maybe they get some momentum late, and they're like, okay, we'll ride this in the next season. However, it's just like, is anything really going to change? I don't think so. I think you're wasting some really good prime players in Bijan Robinson. And so I would let go of Morris if I was the Atlanta Falcons. Now the Ravens and Bills are they're in different spots, obviously record-wise. The Ravens have dealt with, just a very lackluster defense. They've picked it up a little bit. That's obviously John Harbaugh's calling card. But I think he's been there way too long, 17 years. He's really struggled in the playoffs, and you could maybe blame that on Lamar. I think that also could be a coaching thing. I think they could definitely shake it up there in Baltimore. In Buffalo, I don't think they fire him unless they get absolutely smacked in the playoffs. I think it would take something drastic for the Bills to let him go. We've seen them, kind of underperform in the playoffs, and they've kept him. So I don't think that's likely. But again, these first 4 head coaches, I would let go because you need to change something up. Because usually you can tell with a coach in his first couple of years if he's the guy. Dave Canales with the Carolina Panthers. This is a guy, this is year 2, I believe, for him. And you've seen some progress. This team is playing complementary football, right? Their offense is definitely a little shaky. That could be a Bryce Young thing. That could be, just a weapons thing. Teteroa McMillan looks like an absolute stud. That obviously helps with the offense. And so I would keep him just for the fact that they're in play for the division and they could win the division this year, which to me gets him at least nominated for Coach of the Year. Then Ben Johnson, he stays. He's done a great job. Zach Taylor is a very popular pick right now for people to say which is the next head coach to get fired. Since he is currently looking like they're going to miss the playoffs, I wouldn't necessarily put that on Zach Taylor. Now, that might be a crazy take, but when Joe Burrow gets hurt every year and, you had to trade for Joe Flacco this year at the quarterback position to get decent quarterback play. Now, you could say that's a head coaching thing, right? I think the Bengals have been very lackluster the last couple of years. Could definitely is a coaching thing. It's also a health issue. I think he's obviously would be a great OC elsewhere. So definitely could see change there, but I wouldn't put it all on Zach Taylor. Kevin Stefanski is also another guy that has been very lackluster. Now, again, it's injuries, health, bad quarterback play. He's an offensive guy. So, let's pick it up. Now, maybe this is crazy to say. Shooter Sanders maybe saved his job in a sense where it's like, okay, we got this quarterback. He's young. We'll see what Deshaun looks like when he comes back. If this team can make some noise next year, if Myles Garrett can keep up this defensive prowess, their defense has been really good, right? That's really never been a problem under Kevin Stefanski and when he's been there with the Browns. The defense has always kind of shown up. That could just be a Myles Garrett thing, but I still love this. I love the idea of this team. Now, could they shake it up? head coaching wise, since he is an offensive guy, totally. But again, it's the same thing with Zach Taylor. I just don't think it's a head coaching major issue. It's more of a player health issue, especially when your GM makes a trade for a quarterback that has a ton of baggage with him and proceeds to have a very devastating injury with Deshaun Watson tearing his Achilles last season. Then you get Brian Schottenheimer. You could say it's an underwhelming year for the Cowboys, but to be fair, I think I predicted them to win no more than 6 games, and they're 6-1 right now. So, they've kind of met my expectations, and they have a chance to exceed that. So I think he's done a bang-up job. Really seems to be a locker room guy. I'm excited to see how he kind of progresses in his NFL career as a head coach for the Cowboys. Sean Payton stays. That's a no-brainer. They're currently tied for the first seed. They're going to win the division in I believe his 3rd year as a head coach there. Home run pick of a head coaching hire for the Denver Broncos. Dan Campbell, he'll stay. It's not even warm, in my opinion. I definitely think it's unfortunate if they were to miss the playoffs this year. Next year could definitely be at least the start of conversations of, is Dan Campbell the guy? But I don't even think they fire him next year unless they just are totally awful. Matt LaFleur, there was some noise this year with the Packers. He's a good coach. He's going to stay. D'Amico Ryans, this guy just knows how to win games, which to me, the Houston Texans this year felt like fool's gold predicting them, and yet their defense has shown up. Their offense has been a little bad, a little underwhelming. Maybe we'll see what happens with that. But their offense has been good enough for them to win games as of late. They're one of the hottest teams in the NFL right now, in the perfect time when you want to get hot, in December and January, and we'll see if they can win another playoff game this year. Shane Steichen with the Colts got off to a hot start, kind of fading of late. I don't think this is a hot seat situation. Again, health is a major issue. You made Daniel Jones look like a very solid quarterback, which give my props to Daniel Jones. Hopefully his injury rehab goes well. It's just a sad story. However, the Colts, if they collapse late, it's not a very desirable head coaching job. You don't have a quarterback. You don't have your next 2 first-round picks. It's not very desirable. And I think Shane Steichen has done a decent job there in Indianapolis with the Colts. Liam Cohen's done a great job in Jacksonville, really gotten them and making Trevor Lawrence look good, even though he's had an up and down year. Andy Reid, he's the guy you just kind of don't fire. Similar to a Bill Belichick, even though they fired Bill Belichick. They're in New England. I would keep him until the wheels fall off. And again, I don't think it's it's dumb head coaching decisions that he's made, but they also just don't have the same team as late. O-line issues, defense can't get off the field on 3rd down. I don't think firing the head coach would solve those issues, at least in the near future. And then you got Pete Carroll here at the bottom with the Las Vegas Raiders. Give him the boot. To me, it's really just it ended up not being a good hire. I actually loved the idea of it, if I had to be honest, because of hey, we're kind of in a limbo right now. We're going to trade for Geno Smith. We're trading for Geno Smith. We got Ashton Genty. We'll see if we can be competitive this year. This team kind of needs some more juice in the lineup, and it kind of just falls flat. And to me, it's been a Geno Smith issue. It's been a Pete Carroll issue. And for that, it's just been, a whirlwind of issues there for the Raiders. I feel like they just kind of need a reboot, right? It feels like a team. It feels like the Los Angeles Clippers, where they're like, we got a bunch of old heads, but we're still going to figure this out. And it ends up falling flat and kind of backfires on them. So let's take a look at the rest of this list. I'm going to blaze through it real quick. So we have, Pete Carroll's gone. Jim Harbaugh stays. Sean McVay stays. Mike McDaniel. The Dolphins have picked it up as late, and they could potentially make the playoffs. If they make the playoffs, he obviously stays, because what a bang-up job he's done there in Miami if they were to go on that run. Now, they need things to fall into place and whatnot, and it's definitely an uphill battle. But I don't think he's the issue in Miami. I think the issue is the quarterback position. Look, I'm not a big fan of Tua. He's a guy that doesn't pass the eye test to me. However, they've won games as of late. Maybe it's not the strongest competition, but You have the same record right now as the Chiefs, and you could potentially make the playoffs. If you can be in the playoff hunt in December, that's a decent team. And so I would assess, to me, it's like, okay, are we better off with this guy or should we look elsewhere? And I just don't know if the Miami Dolphins are better off with a different guy right now. I feel like if they were to fire McDaniel, it's because they have another guy in place. Kevin O'Connell stays. Again, the same thing. Quarterback. GM's kind of screwed him over. Should have kept Sam Darnold in hindsight. But again, I think it's kind of a move you had to make. You drafted him, with your first round pick. He was a winner in college. He hasn't looked good. So for J.J. McCarthy, you definitely want to see that development into year technically 3 for him, as he missed his whole rookie year with an injury, kind of a redshirt year. So for him to perform as he's been performing has definitely been a little lackluster. But again, we've seen Kevin O'Connell kind of be the quarterback whisperer of the NFL, making guys like Sam Darnold look good. And it's really been, kind of a shocker for how bad the Vikings offense has been, especially how quiet Justin Jefferson has been as well. Mike Vrabel, another bang-up job, home run hire. Kellen Moore, again, I just think the Saints were going to be bad regardless of who they hired at head coach. Like, they could have hired Mike Vrabel, and I still think they probably would have been bad. Maybe they could have had a couple more wins. But for Kellen Moore, I'm not necessarily pressing the panic button. Let him get a young quarterback. I know Tyler Shuck was there that they drafted in the second round. He's provided some life into the Saints offense, which is great for New Orleans. However, let's slow it down. Maybe you draft a quarterback with your first round pick upcoming this year, because you're going to have one of the top picks at 3 and 10. And so for the Saints, let him get a young quarterback and see what he can do, and then we'll renegotiate or rethink where they stand at head coaching position. Mike Kafka for the Giants, interim coach. It is what it is. Aaron Glenn, first-year head coaching. First off, a head coach should never be fired after the first year. That goes for Kellen Moore. Also goes with Aaron Glenn and Brian Schottenheimer. Got to give him a year, or you got to give him 2 to 3 years at least. I think Aaron Glenn could potentially be building something very scary here in the next couple of years with all the first-round picks. They got rid of kind of their core guys in Sauce Gardner and Quinnen Williams, but they kept Garrett Wilson on the offensive side of the ball. They just got to find a quarterback in which, with those first-round picks, with their own pick, they could potentially draft a young guy. And if their offense can be at least competent with Breece Hall there in the backfield and get some more defensive pieces and build an offensive line, like they could make some noise for sure, especially with all the picks they have. Nick Sirianni, he, to me, has the hottest seat in the NFL. If they miss the playoffs this year, I think he's done, which is crazy to say a year after they win the Super Bowl. To me, I would fire him because it's like, this is unacceptable, especially if they collapse and miss the playoffs entirely. If they stumble and lose in the first round, okay, not our season. Let's reassess our offensive coordinator position. Let's reassess our offensive line. Where do we need to go with our first round pick next year? Probably somewhere in the trenches on the offensive side of the ball. And we'll figure it out from there. So, but if they miss the playoffs, to me, it's 2 out of the last 3 years. Now I get that 1 year you won the Super Bowl, but the last last 2 years out of 3, you've collapsed and you've looked awful. Now again, he's made 2 Super Bowl appearances, won. So that's definitely a more controversial pick. But I think Philly fans would kind of agree, like, no, we got the team. Maybe the head coaching's not right. And I think they could definitely be in a spot to potentially move off a guy like Nick Sirianni. Mike Tomlin, he's done. I mean, I could rant about this. People have been talking about Mike Tomlin being done. He's to me, he should have been gone a while ago. Again, it's like, oh, but it's quarterback. I'm like, yeah, but you have a very expensive defense, and your defense has been underwhelming. Right. And so to me, I'm kind of, even though they could win the division this year, I'm just like, you're going to win the worst division in football right now. Right. That's not necessarily a flex. I think they need someone young on the offensive side of the ball, because they've always been kind of a defensive team. They haven't been really great offensively, at least since Ben Roethlisberger retired. So the Steelers need a little bit of shakeup. And then these final guys, talked about Todd Bowles, but everyone else should stay for at least one more full season. And so that'll do it for this hot take quarterback. This one is like, it's interesting. We'll reassess this whole discussion, whole topic once the season is over. I'll make my final predictions. These are just how I think right now. Again, Philly could go on a run and win the Super Bowl, and you're like, okay, you're definitely not firing Mike Sirianni. Chiefs could lose out, and it was like, okay, maybe Andy Reid retires, or Maybe they look in another direction. To me, I would you can never fire your best coach in franchise history. It would always be a parting ways. That's how I would do it. But I digress. But now, let's transition and talk about this playoff picture really quick, because I think it is such a fascinating discussion on where we're at entering this week's slate of games, because this almost looks like the 2017 bracket a little bit, or 2015 in a sense, right? I mean, the AFC definitely feels a little top-heavy. Broncos, Patriots. Feels like it's probably one of those two teams. The only other team I would potentially pick is the Bills to make a run. The Chargers, to me, it's O-line. It feels like fool's gold with them a little bit. I like them. I like them a lot more than the Jags and the Steelers. Quarterback play, defense a little bit, but I'm kind of fading them. And then you look at the 7 seed Texans. Texans could 1,000% upset one of the top seeds, but you're telling me if the playoffs started today, they're going on the road and beating the Patriots in Foxborough? Actually, I could definitely see that. Damn. Yeah, I could see the Texans making a run, at least of how they're playing right now. They're the hottest team in the NFL. And so I get the Patriots have won a lot of games in a row, but I think the Texans would be really the only team on this list that I could see going into Foxborough tomorrow and beating the Patriots. I'm not saying I would predict it, but I could see it happening more than any other team in the AFC. And then obviously you have your teams in the hunt in the AFC. I'm not really scared of any of these, or I'm not worried about any of these teams in the hunt. Colts, they're done. It's a very sad story for the Colts, especially because it really felt like they could potentially make a run to at least the AFC Championship. Ravens, they're just not playing good ball on either side. Lamar having probably the worst year of his career since his rookie year. Chiefs, they're just not a good football team that can't find ways to win close games. Dolphins, again, I talked about them a little earlier. I mean, their playoff chances are very, very, very slim this week. I think they could probably be eliminated this week if they lose. I mean, it doesn't matter if they win. If you look at the odds, it's 1% it's a 1% chance if they win. Currently, it's less than a 1% chance. So, I mean, they definitely have a chance. But let's be real, they're not making it. And then the Bengals, I think Trey Hendrickson's out for the season, or at least out for a couple weeks now. And so it's like, do you really trust that defense? I don't. So I think the playoff format, or the playoff teams right now in the AFC will be those teams. The order might shake up a little bit, but, it's definitely a very competitive AFC, but it's definitely top heavy in terms of your quality teams. So if I had to predict a team to potentially go on a run, if Denver gets that 1 seed and they play every game at Mile High, that's dangerous for any offense, especially with that pass rush. They get a week off. Sean Payton is maybe the most, you could make the argument he's the most experienced head coach in the AFC, even with Mike Tomlin there in Pittsburgh. I think everyone would pick Broncos over the Steelers. So I'd probably pick the Broncos, and call me crazy, the Texans. The way the Texans are playing right now, I would not want to play them in the first round. I mean, could you imagine the Patriots go out and they win the rest of their games? They end the season 15-2, and you're rewarded with a red-hot Houston Texans team that's coming to town and can get after your quarterback in Drake May. That's not the best present for getting the 2nd seed. But now let's transition to the NFC side. The Rams, to me, it's very top-heavy again, like the AFC, except it's different in how they're top-heavy. It's really the top 2 teams in the whole conference, with the Seahawks and the Rams. Those are the 2 teams I would be the most scared to face off in the first round if I'm any other team. To me, the Packers, I feel like there's a way to beat them. Limit the pass rush and run the ball and make Jordan Love uncomfortable. If Jordan Love has time to pass, they're going to be pretty much unbeatable. However, I really like the fact that, they've really picked up some quality wins as of late. And if they can get that 1st seed and you have to go to Lambeau every time, that's definitely an uphill climb. The Rams just look like a juggernaut. They're probably the most consistent team in the NFL. I know they just dropped a game a couple weeks ago to the Carolina Panthers, but Carolina has shown to be a pretty decent squad, and definitely not a team you can squawk at in terms of, on your schedule as an easy win. And the Eagles, we'll talk about Eagles-Cowboys here in a second. And then you have the 49ers, to me, which is the most confusing, and the Bears. I'll get to the Bears in a second. But the 49ers are the most confusing team in the NFL because they have suffered brutal injuries the entire year, and yet they're still winning games. That goes to their head coach and Kyle Shanahan. They've been, really well-oiled machine. Christian McCaffrey's probably going to win Comeback Player of the Year. Quarterback room is kind of a controversial talking point, but, as long as you're winning games and protecting the ball, if you're Brock Purdy or even Mac Jones, your defense has been playing really well and well enough to win you games. I would probably want to play them out of any of the wildcard teams, though, because the Bears have also been one of the best running the ball teams in the entire NFL. Ben Johnson's done such a great job in Chicago, in which you feel like we might not have a chance to win today against the Bears, right? Or if the Bears have a lead late, you're like, the Bears probably won't choke this. This is probably theirs. It helps when you have a run game. It also helps when you have a pretty decent defense, right? They lost a close game against Green Bay. I'm not necessarily too worried about Caleb Williams. I definitely think there's limitations this year in terms of them making a run. For me, it's like if they can win one playoff game, that's a successful season. I don't think their window is open right now. It doesn't mean it can't be open next year. I just think you kind of have to build up to that. And so for the Bears, it sucks right now that you went from 1-7. Obviously, the season for them is far from over. They definitely have a chance to win the division, especially because they'll play Green Bay again. And the Green Bay Packers feels like they could always regress to an average team and drop one of their final games this season. The Bears have a chance to win that division. Then you get to the in the hunt, which the in the hunt teams, AFC versus NFC, is night and day. The NFC teams are clearly better. The Lions, they were really hoping. They have a game against the Bears this week, I believe. Not this week, but one more this season. That will be a huge game if Chicago drops their game this week against Cleveland. That could be huge because the Bears are out, Lions are in, and I think that would be unfortunate for the Bears in terms of momentum for next year. But for the Lions, it's like, whew, it's almost like, how do we almost miss the playoffs type beat? But they have been a really solid team. They've definitely had their flaws, a little bit of injuries, but nothing too crazy for Detroit. And we'll see if they, can potentially make a run. They play the Rams this week, which is a huge game for them. They got the big win over Dallas last week. And speaking of Dallas, they're going to miss the playoffs probably. We'll talk about the Eagles and NFC East in a sec, but the wild card's probably out of the conversation. And so for the Cowboys, definitely one of the more buzz-happy teams in terms of headlines with the trade acquisitions and then them beating the Eagles and Chiefs in back-to-back games. But that Lions game definitely showed the limitations of this team, and just their defense is still not there. Their linebacker room is terrible. Their DBs aren't really that good either. So they definitely have flaws on defense, but with 2 first-round picks, they could make some noise next season. And so who would I pick in this division or in this conference right now? Probably the Rams is the most confident one. Obviously, they're the first seed. But then watch out for the Packers. I think the Packers definitely have a lot of upside with their roster. It's really just on who's going to step up in the wide receiver position for Green Bay when it matters most. Is it Christian Watson, Jaden Reed, Matthew Golden? Is he ever going to show up this season? Is Josh Jacobs going to be healthy when it comes to postseason? We'll have to see. And then it's really like, will Sam Darnold show up in the playoffs? Right? Last year with Minnesota, he turned into a pumpkin against the Rams, and that's kind of all she wrote for his tenure in Minnesota. Can he kind of exercise some demons? I mean, if they keep on going at the way they are right now, assuming the Rams win out and win the division, they'll be going on the road to play the NFC South, which is definitely a winnable game for them if it's Carolina or even Tampa Bay. But now let's take a look. Let's flip over to let me just make this me real quick on the video feed for our YouTube listeners. It's Cowboys-Eagles talk time, and with the first, so I only watched the first episode of Hard Knocks, and that definitely set up, like, that would be an all-time watch if the Eagles were to collapse. Now, yes, I'm a Cowboys fan. I got the Mavericks poster over here, but I'm a Cowboys fan, and I really thought this team could potentially go on a run. Obviously, I think they can make the playoffs if the Eagles obviously collapse. but I definitely don't think they'll win a playoff game. I just think their defense isn't there. But when you look at the Philly, right, they have 4 more games left, and they need to lose 2. Cowboys need to win out. And when you look at Philly's schedule, they play Washington twice, they play the Raiders next week, and they play the Bills. Now, the way they've been playing right now, I'd probably say the Bills is a loss, right? That's not a crazy take. Could I see them potentially going, I believe that's on the road too, into, Buffalo and winning that game? Philly, if they pick it up, their defense is, still very solid. If they get, their D tackle back in Carter, that he kind of is their whole, not their whole defense, but he's such an important piece of their defense. He's like the Quinnen Williams of the Cowboys. When he's not there, teams are able to run the ball. We saw that with Chicago, them losing against the Chargers. The Chargers were able to run the ball a little bit. And so, he definitely changes the defensive side for the Eagles, but they'll probably win it. If they lose against the Raiders, right, that's probably a win. I don't even want to even start this conversation if they beat the Raiders. But if they lose to the Raiders, we are an all-time collapse watch. Oh, absolutely, right? The Tampa Bay's collapse is kind of getting overshadowed by the potential of the Eagles just because bigger brand, Cowboys are in play. If it was like Washington, potentially, we would still be talking about them because they're defending champs, but wouldn't be to the same level of magnitude. But if the Eagles were to lose to Las Vegas, and let's just say if the Eagles were to lose 2 out of the next 4, and the Cowboys win out, and the Cowboys win the division, and the Eagles miss the playoffs, could you imagine the atmosphere in Philadelphia? That would, you saw how bad it was when they won the Super Bowl. Could you imagine if they missed the playoffs the year after winning the Super Bowl? They're already egging their OC's house. What do you think they'll do to Nick Sirianni? What they'll do to Jalen Hurts, right? Jalen Hurts just had a 5-turnover game against the Chargers, and they're already cooking him, right? And so, look, obviously being a Cowboys fan, being a homer, when I'm talking about this, it would be great to see. However, Philly they played themselves out of the first seed, right? Which was pretty crucial for them last year in the postseason. I wouldn't say they wouldn't have won without it. However, definitely would have been, harder for them to go on the road, especially because maybe they play Washington earlier and then Detroit makes it and Detroit maybe has their number. Could have been something like that. But this year, they're the 3rd seed right now. Potentially have to play Green Bay in that second round if they win against, currently it's San Francisco. But I really don't think they would be a massive favorite in that wild card spot because there's a chance they could actually fall to the 4th seed and have to play Seattle or Los Angeles in that wild card game. And they probably won't be favored. If it was right now, games in Philly, and it's them versus the Seahawks, I bet the Seahawks would probably be favored. Or at least it would be like a 1.5, 2 point line. Like, to me, Philly is probably the coldest team in the NFL. And the part that makes it so confusing is they have all the talent, right? They just won the freaking Super Bowl. And now they are going to regress to potentially a first-round exit. Now, again, if I'm a Philly fan, you're like, hey, if you were to say this like 2 years ago, like, hey, next 2 years, you're going to kind of collapse, make the playoffs, but maybe lose in the first round. But you'll win a Super Bowl in between. You'd be like, yes, I'm taking that, right? So Philly can be upset about it, but you still won a Super Bowl. But this would just be the funniest divisional collapse in NFC history because the fact that they're defending champs. This would supersede 2 years ago when Philly collapsed and definitely makes questions about Nick Sirianni and where he stands with the head coaching position in Philly. I think if they were to collapse, well, one, they're firing Kevin Patulio if they were to collapse. I just don't see how they keep him. But then it's also like, well, Nick Sirianni wanted to keep this guy. And again, we won the Super Bowl. But when things haven't gone right with injuries and whatnot, offense is definitely a little banged up on the offensive line. That's when coaching really takes the forefront. It's like, okay, how can we win when our offensive line isn't playing well, or when our quarterback isn't playing well, or our receiver is crying and complaining to the media? How do we get this offense going? Because our defense has been pretty fantastic, right? Definitely feels like a top 5 unit, definitely top 10 if you look at the stats. And so for Philly, moving forward, this, I don't want to say it's a make or break in terms of their Super Bowl window, but it definitely could potentially hurt it if they were to miss the playoffs, fire coaching, and then hire the wrong guy. Because, like him or not, Nick Sirianni did win a Super Bowl. So there's upside, right? He's done this before. And so there's definitely a lot of questions out in Philly right now. And if they lose to Vegas, they already got rid of the positivity rabbit. I wonder what they'll do next in that locker room. And so that'll bring us to the close of this episode. It's been 40 minutes. It's glad to be back. Again, this is my first episode in a while. Appreciate you guys if you made it this far. If you have, comment the word pickle. That was the first thing that came to mind. Comment the word pickle. Anyways, go follow me on social media. All Jacked Up Sports on TikTok. AJU Sports on X. All Jacked Up Sports on Instagram. Go follow the social medias. Definitely trying to get more personal on the Instagram. Trying to build that up a little bit. I actually forgot about that. That's a good point. Anyways, hopefully I'll get this out on this Friday. If I get it out on Saturday, hopefully you're having a great weekend. If it's out on Friday, have a great weekend. Let's enjoy it. Let's watch some football. Let's enjoy, hopefully your time off. And thank you again for watching, and God bless. I guess I got to sign out too. I'm Jackson James. I'll see you on the next one.